how does the voice of one affect their life? Can the voices of people change the world around them? In A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bea, he finds himself torn away by a rebellion in Sierra Leone from his family and childhood, which consisted of school, family, and music. As a young child, Ishmael found happiness and passion performing alongside his brothers and friends to rap music. He also enjoyed and worked hard in school, finding meaning in monologues by Shakespeare. However, once separated from his family in rebel attacks, Ishmael ran for his life, leaving behind his past life and leaving behind his voice. He spent months in near silence, even when in the company of others. He eventually got rehabilitated by NGOs and UNICEF, and spoke in the UN on the crisis in Sierra Leone. In A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bea, Ishmael uses his voice, which carries his story, to cope with his trauma, express his thoughts and experiences, and tell his story by performing for others, inspiring and calling others to action. Ishmael first expresses the power of voice when performing for others and himself. In the beginning, Ishmael develops a strong passion to rap music, performing the lyrics and creating powerful notes. His voice conveys his passion and his story, consisting of his experiences up until that point and his ambition. His childhood story corresponds to a typical child story: innocence, fun, and happiness, and that becomes expressed in his voice. Later in the story, when captured by a local village, Ishmael performs his rap music for his life. However, he notices difference in his attitude, ability, and style. The war changes his perspective and affects the way he uses his voice. It changes the way he views his voice and makes it evolve, almost unfamiliar to Ishmael. He says, "I didn't feel it this time. As I hopped up and down, hunched and raising my arms and feet to the music, I thought about being thrown in the ocean, about how difficult it would be to know that death was inevitable." Ishmael also inspires and calls others to action with his voice. After going through rehabilitation after fighting the war, Ishmael is asked to speak to others about his experiences, rehabilitation, future possibilities, and change. Ishmael makes speeches, using his life stories and experiences to paint the scene around him. Ishmael's voice is his story. His voice tells his story and touches the hearts of those around him. After being adopted by his uncle's family, Ishmael is given the opportunity to travel to New York City at a new United Nations conference to represent Sierra Leone and discuss the world's issues as children. Children from all over the world gather together to communicate and bring attention to problems. Ishmael participates and speaks. He carries his heart, his stories, and ultimately his life. I decided to speak from my heart instead. I talked briefly about my experience and my hope that the war would end. It was the only way that adults would stop recruiting children. Ishmael finally conveys his story through his voice with silence. As seen when he travels with his brothers, his friends, and by himself, Ishmael's journey mostly happens in silence, a lack of voice. They walk in silence, traumatized by horrific destruction, brutal death, and hardship as they traverse away from the rebels and run to survive. Everyone was too quiet, and I didn't know how to break the silence. I thought about where my family was, whether I would be able to see them again, and wished that they were safe. The views add to Ishmael's story and the overwhelming quantity of terror filling it, shutting down his voice. His silence throughout his travels show a forever changed life, a changed voice that cannot operate and tell his story until he understands and fully accepts his purpose. In A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bea, Ishmael uses his voice, which carries his story, to cope with his trauma, express his thoughts and experiences, and tell his story by performing for others, inspiring and calling others to action, and remaining silent. Ishmael uses his voice and performs entertainment in the form of music and literature. When he leaves behind his childhood, his perspective and story morph the interpretation of his music. Ishmael's speaking and speeches tell his story, call for action, and inform the world on the crisis. His silence throughout his travels show a changed voice that cannot operate until Ishmael can comprehend and discover his life. Everyone's voices affect their life. Everyone carries their voice at all times. It holds their story, their life, and their experiences. The voice is written in a lifespan. No matter how fast, how slow, how sudden, it lets people see their life and realize their ideas. By projecting to the world, people can inspire others, influence other people's stories, and spread personal tales. When everyone uses their voice, people realize the problems in the ever-changing world and can work together, using the chorus of voices and stories to plant the seeds of change the world needs.